My parents laughed. Some kids make you proud. Others are walking ATMs. My sister sneered. I replied, good thing my ATM is moving 3,000 miles away. Your bills are your problem now. I am 27 years old, and for the last 5 years, my life has been defined by numbers that do not belong to me. I work as a senior accountant in a high-rise office in downtown Atlanta, spending my days balancing corporate ledgers and finding missing pennies for multi-million-dollar firms. But every night, when I come home to my cramped, one-bedroom apartment, I perform a much more painful kind of accounting. Tonight, the fluorescent light in my kitchen flickers as I stare at my latest bank statement. There it is, right near the bottom, an automatic deduction of $450. This is not for a car payment, a mortgage, or even my own student loans. No, this $450 is a monthly tribute to my sister's incompetence. The debt started 5 years ago as a $15,000 private student loan. My sister, Vivian, who is now 30, decided she needed to attend a prestigious out-of-state university to study luxury brand management. She never finished the degree, but she certainly finished the money. My parents, Richard and Margaret, had already exhausted their own credit lines maintaining their suburban colonial house and their country club memberships. When the bank demanded a cosigner for Vivian's final year of tuition, they didn't look at their own dwindling savings. They looked at me. I was 22, fresh out of college, and terrified of my mother's emotional blackmail. Margaret sat on my sofa, weeping about family unity and how I was the reliable one who had to save Vivian's future. I signed the papers because I thought that was what a good daughter did. I thought if I carried the load, they would finally see me as an equal to Vivian. I was wrong. Vivian dropped out 6 months later, moved back to Atlanta, and immediately defaulted on the payments. The bank didn't go after Vivian. They came for the cosigner with a steady job. For 3 years, I have been hemorrhaging $450 a month to cover a debt for a degree that doesn't exist, while Vivian struts around in $3,000 designer heels and posts photos of her entrepreneurial journey on social media. Every time I tried to bring it up, Richard would wave me off, telling me that Vivian was on the verge of a breakthrough and that I should be grateful I have such a stable, boring career that allows me to help. I fold the statement into a sharp, precise square. I don't throw it away. Instead, I walk to my bedroom and pull back the corner of the rug. Under a loose floorboard, I keep a heavy, plastic file I call the red folder. Inside is every single receipt, every bank transfer, and every debt I have ever paid on their behalf, all calculated with compound interest. I am an accountant, and if there is one thing I know, it is that every ledger must eventually be balanced. They think I am a doormat, but they forget that a doormat is the first thing you step on before you walk out the door for good. The air in my office at the firm always feels a bit thinner than the air outside, crisp, professional, and entirely focused on results. This afternoon, my manager, Nora, called me into her glass-walled office. Nora is a woman who values precision above all else, and she looked at me today with a rare, genuine smile. She pushed a folder across her mahogany desk and told me I was being promoted to senior accountant. I had streamlined a massive client's tax filing, saving them millions through sheer, exhausting attention to detail. The promotion came with a significant raise, bringing my salary to $98,000 a year. I walked out of that office feeling like I was finally standing on solid ground. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I imagined telling my parents and seeing a flicker of pride in Richard's eyes. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this achievement would be enough to make them realize I wasn't just a backup plan for Vivian's failures. I drove to their house that evening, my heart racing with a hope I should have known better than to harbor. The house was glowing with warmth when I arrived. I found them in the living room, surrounded by Vivian's shopping bags. Vivian was draped over an armchair, holding a glass of expensive wine, while Margaret was busy admiring a new leather handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Mom, Dad, I have some news," I said, my voice wavering only slightly. "I got promoted today. I'm a senior accountant now. The partners gave me a raise and a senior title for the work I did on the global tax audit. Richard didn't even look up from the financial news on the television. He gave a short, distracted nod. That's nice, Hazel. Good for you. It's important to have a steady paycheck when you aren't as creative as your sister. She's right, Richard, Margaret added, her eyes still glued to Vivian's new bag. Steady work is good for people like Hazel. But did you hear? Vivian is looking at a new storefront in Buckhead? She's going places, Hazel. You should really take notes on her ambition. Vivian smirked at me over the rim of her glass, her eyes glinting with a cruel triumph. My promotion, which represented hundreds of hours of overtime and years of dedication, was reduced to a steady paycheck in under 30 seconds. I stood there in my sensible work suit, feeling like a ghost in my own family home. I realized then that they didn't want me to succeed. They just wanted me to be functional enough to keep the money flowing in their direction. The hope I had felt earlier died a quiet, cold death right there on their expensive Persian rug. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just turned and walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, my mind already beginning to calculate the cost of a one-way ticket to a city where nobody knew my name. The storm that hit Atlanta that night was a monster, with lightning cracking over the suburbs and rain so heavy it sounded like gravel hitting the roof. My parents insisted I stay the night in my old childhood bedroom, which had long since been converted into a storage space for Vivian's unsold boutique inventory. I was surrounded by boxes of synthetic silk scarves and overpriced candles, feeling more like a piece of inventory than a daughter. At 2 a.m, I couldn't sleep. The house felt heavy with the weight of things unsaid. I walked quietly down the hallway to the kitchen for a glass of water, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. As I passed Richard's home office, I saw a sliver of light coming from the door. I heard voices. Richard and Margaret were on a late-night call with Vivian. I froze in the shadows, my hand hovering near the door frame. I know, honey, the boutique's rent is steep, Richard was saying, his voice unusually gentle, a tone he never used with me. But you have to maintain the image. Perception is everything in business. I'm just stressed, Dad. Vivian's voice crackled through the speakerphone, sounding practiced and whiny. The marketing agency wants another $2,000, and I still haven't paid the deposit for the fall collection. Don't cry, Vivian, Margaret soothed. We will figure it out. We always do. Your father was just talking about how Hazel's new promotion means she'll have more disposable income. We'll just tell her the family needs a little extra help this month. She won't mind. But what if she says no this time? Vivian asked. She's been acting so cold lately. Richard let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that made my stomach turn. She won't say no. Hazel doesn't have the spine for it. Besides, what else is she going to spend that money on? She doesn't have a life. She's a bore. Let her pay the bills, it gives her something to do. She's basically just a walking ATM for this family anyway. A walking ATM. The words felt like a physical blow to my chest. I stood there in the dark, surrounded by the expensive furniture my labor had helped preserve, and listened to my parents laugh at my expense. They didn't see a daughter who was struggling, who was tired, or who was proud of her career. They saw a machine that produced $450 a month plus interest. I walked back to the guest room, my movements robotic. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the boxes of Vivian's ambitions stacked against the wall. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I realized that as long as I was within their reach, I would never be anything more than a line item in their budget. I took out my phone and opened a browser window. I didn't look at social media. I looked at job listings in Seattle, Washington. It was 2,600 miles away, nearly 3,000 miles of distance between me and the people who saw me as a piece of machinery. I began to draft my first application that night, the blue light of the screen reflected in my eyes like a promise. The next morning at breakfast, I was the perfect walking ATM. I smiled politely when Margaret asked if I could help out with a small $2,000 investment in Vivian's boutique. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I simply told them I would look at my accounts and see what I could do. Inside, I was already counting the days until I disappeared. I returned to my apartment and began the most meticulous audit of my life. I pulled the red folder from beneath the floorboard and spread the contents across my small dining table. I had receipts for everything. The $700 transmission repair for Vivian's car, the $3,000 I lent my parents for their anniversary cruise 2 years ago, and every single monthly loan payment I had made since Vivian dropped out. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop and titled it Final Settlement. I didn't just list the raw numbers. I added a standard market interest rate of 7%, compounded annually. As an accountant, I knew that money has a time value, and they had stolen a significant portion of my youth. The grand total at the bottom of the sheet made even my eyes widen: $52,842. That was the cost of my loyalty. That was the price of their love. I spent the rest of the week living like a ghost. I canceled my gym membership, my streaming services, and my grocery delivery. I began eating bulk-bought rice and beans, funneling every spare cent into my hidden Seattle account. Every time I felt a pang of hunger or exhaustion, I just thought of the phrase walking ATM and the feeling passed. I also began to audit my physical life. I looked around my apartment at the things I had bought to try and feel successful: the designer rug, the expensive coffee maker, the guest bed I never used because nobody ever visited. I listed them all on online marketplaces under a pseudonym. I didn't want my family to see me selling my life away. One evening, a young couple came to buy my dining table for $150. As they carried it out, the girl looked at my nearly empty living room and asked if I was moving. "I'm graduating," I told her with a small, private smile. "From what?" she asked. "From being a character in someone else's story," I replied. She laughed, thinking I was joking, but as the door closed, the silence in the apartment felt like a victory. I sat on the floor with my laptop, looking at a beautiful studio apartment in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood. It was small, but it had a view of the water and, most importantly, it was 3,000 miles away from Richard, Margaret, and their golden child. I clicked apply and felt the first real breath of air reach my lungs in 5 years. The following Tuesday, the walking ATM was summoned again. I was in the middle of a complex audit for a manufacturing firm when my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Margaret. I ignored the first 3 calls, but the fourth was accompanied by a text in all caps: "Hazel, pick up, it's an emergency." I stepped into the break room and answered. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Oh, Hazel, thank goodness," Margaret sobbed, her voice high and frantic. "Vivian's car broke down on the freeway. The transmission is shot. The mechanic says it will be $800 just to get it running again, and Vivian has a very important networking event tonight for the boutique. Your father is at a golf tournament and can't be reached. You have to wire her the money right now." I looked out the window at the gray Atlanta skyline. I had exactly $900 in my primary checking account, intended for my own rent and groceries. My Seattle fund was locked away in a separate bank. "Mom, I don't have $800 to spare right now," I said, my voice as flat as I could make it. "Don't be selfish, Hazel." Margaret snapped, the tears vanishing instantly. "Your sister's career is at a critical turning point. You have a steady job. You can just wait a few weeks for your next paycheck. Family helps family. Now, do I need to have your father call you?" The familiar threat. The looming shadow of Richard's disappointment. Normally, this was the point where I would fold, transfer the money, and eat ramen for the rest of the month. But something had shifted inside me. I realized that every dollar I gave them now was a day longer I would have to stay in this city. "I'll see what I can do," I said, and hung up. I didn't wire the money. Instead, I waited until my lunch break, walked to the bank, and withdrew $700 in cash. I didn't send it to Vivian. I took that cash, walked to a different bank, and deposited it into my Seattle fund. That evening, I had to walk 3 blocks to the bus stop in a torrential downpour because my own car's battery had finally died from neglect. As I stood there, soaked to the bone, watching expensive cars splash through the puddles, I watched a social media notification pop up on my phone. It was a photo of Vivian, looking radiant in a new designer dress, standing next to a shiny loaner car. The caption read, "When the universe tests you, keep shining." So grateful for parents who always have my back. Hashtag entrepreneur life, hashtag blessed. I turned off my phone and stepped onto the crowded, steaming bus. My shoes were ruined, my coat was heavy with water, and I was shivering. But as I looked at my reflection in the window, I didn't see a victim. I saw an auditor who was finally closing a very bad account. Vivian had her blessings, but I had $700 more of freedom. By the end of the second week, my apartment looked like a crime scene or a fresh start, depending on who was looking. I had sold almost everything. My bed was gone, replaced by a cheap air mattress I had borrowed from Nora. My television, my bookshelves, even my extra sets of towels had been converted into cash. I was living out of 2 large suitcases tucked away in the closet. Living in an empty space is a strange experience. Every sound echoes. Every footstep reminds you that you are already halfway gone. I spent my evenings sitting on the floor with my laptop, meticulously researching Seattle neighborhoods. I mapped out the distance from the Queen and studio to my new office, a brisk 20-minute walk or a short bus ride. I looked at photos of the Space Needle and the fog rolling over the bay, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine spark of excitement. I also began the process of scrubbing my digital life. I changed the privacy settings on all my accounts, blocking any friends who were actually just spies for Vivian. I updated my resume one last time, highlighting my new senior accountant title and my expertise in forensic auditing. I was no longer just a girl who was good with numbers. I was a professional with a highly specialized skill set, and Seattle was willing to pay me $98,000 a year for it. One night, Margaret called to check in. "Hazel, you've been so quiet lately," she said, her voice dripping with that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted something. "We haven't seen you for dinner in 2 weeks. Richard is starting to think you're still upset about that little joke he made at the party." "I've just been busy with a new promotion, Mom," I said, staring at the bare white walls of my bedroom. "There's a lot of paperwork to catch up on." "Well, you should come over this weekend," she insisted. "Vivian is having a pre-launch celebration at the house. She wants to show you the new look for the boutique. And Richard wants to talk to you about your 401k. He thinks you should consider taking a loan against it to help Vivian with the store's security deposit. It would be a tax-advantaged way for the family to grow together." They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They wanted to raid my retirement before I even had the chance to reach it. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice as hollow as my apartment. As I hung up, I looked at the red folder lying on the floor. I opened the spreadsheet and added a new line item: emotional labor, attempted retirement theft. I didn't put a dollar amount next to it. I just wrote, price, total estrangement. I closed the folder and tucked it back under the floorboard. The countdown was at 10 days. The most dangerous moment of my rebellion happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had taken a half-day off to meet with a moving coordinator and to finalize the shipping for my 2 suitcases. I was standing in my living room, which was now completely empty except for a few cardboard boxes and my laptop, when there was a sharp, aggressive knock at the door. Before I could even reach for the handle, the door swung open. It was Beatrice, my first cousin and the family's self-appointed Minister of Information. Beatrice is 3 years older than me, lives on a trust fund, and spends her entire life monitoring the rest of the family for any signs of deviance. "Hazel." I was in the neighborhood and Beatrice stopped, her mouth hanging open as she looked around the barren apartment. "What on earth is going on here? Did you get robbed? Where is your furniture?" I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit my system. I had to think fast. "I'm redecorating, Beatrice," I said, forcing a calm, bored tone. I decided the old stuff was too cluttered. "I'm going for a Scandinavian minimalist look. Everything is on backorder." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, stepping further into the room. She walked over to my laptop, which was still open to a page showing top 10 coffee shops in Seattle. "Scandinavian minimalism? In Atlanta?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And why are you looking at coffee shops in Washington State? Is Vivian planning a trip?" "No, my manager, Nora, is going there for a conference," I lied smoothly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "She asked me to find some good spots near her hotel." You know how she is about her espresso. Beatrice stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way to turn this into a scandal she could report back to Margaret. You're acting very strange, Hazel, she said finally, tossing her hair. Ever since that promotion, you've been acting like you're too good for the rest of us. Just don't forget that Vivian is the one with the real vision. You're just the one who counts the beans. I haven't forgotten my place, Beatrice, I said, ushering her toward the door. I have a lot of work to do. Give my best to the family. I practically pushed her out of the apartment and locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That was too close. If Beatrice had seen my suitcases or my plane ticket, Richard would have been here within the hour to confiscate my passport for my own protection. I realized then that I couldn't wait 10 more days. I had to move the timeline up. I went in my laptop and changed my flight. I wasn't leaving in 10 days. I was leaving in 48 hours, the morning of Richard and Margaret's 35th wedding anniversary party. The final 48 hours were a blur of calculated precision. I worked my final shift at the firm, handing over my files to Nora with a quiet, professional goodbye. She knew I was leaving. I had told her the truth weeks ago. Nora was the only person who had ever treated me like a professional instead of a resource, and she had been instrumental in helping me secure the Seattle offer. You're doing the right thing, Hazel, she told me as I walked out the door for the last time. Don't look back. People like your parents only have power if you stay in the room. Once you're gone, their spells don't work anymore. I went home and performed the final ritual. I pulled the red folder from the floorboard and opened the final settlement spreadsheet. I printed out 3 copies. One for Richard, one for Margaret, and one for Vivian. I placed each copy into a crisp, white envelope with their names written on the front in my neatest accountant's script. I packed my 2 suitcases and checked the weight, exactly 49 pounds each, just under the limit. I looked around my empty apartment one last time. The bare walls and the echoing silence no longer felt lonely, they felt like a clean slate. I had built this life from nothing while carrying the weight of my sister's failures, and I would build a new one the same way. I checked my Seattle bank account, $5,200 in liquid savings, plus my relocation bonus and my first month's salary waiting for me. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't in the red. I was solvent. I was free. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. The anniversary party was scheduled for 7 that evening at the country club. I wouldn't be attending as the walking ATM. I would be attending as the auditor delivering a final, devastating report. As I lay on the air mattress in the middle of my empty bedroom, listening to the hum of the city outside, I felt a strange sense of peace. I thought about Richard's walking ATM joke and Margaret's family unity speeches. Tomorrow, they would realize that the ATM had been emptied, and the unity had been a one-way street that had finally reached a dead end. I closed my eyes and dreamed of the Seattle fog, 3,000 miles away from the heat and the lies of Atlanta. If you're enjoying the story so far, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment below and tell me which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to the disaster at the country club. The Atlanta Country Club is a place designed to make people feel important, even if their bank accounts are screaming in agony. As I drove my old, reliable Honda up the winding, tree-lined driveway, I felt like a dark spot on a bleached white canvas. The valet, a young man who looked like he'd been plucked from a fraternity catalog, gave my car a look of polite confusion before taking the keys. I didn't care. I smoothed out the skirt of my $40 black dress and walked toward the grand entrance. The ballroom was a masterpiece of financial fiction. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the 300 guests. White silk drapes covered every inch of the walls, and the scent of thousands of fresh lilies was almost suffocating. In the center of the room stood a massive ice sculpture of 2 swans, their necks intertwined in a display of eternal love that cost more than my monthly rent. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and tiny appetizers that probably cost $10 a bite. I stood near a marble pillar, gripping my clutch purse, which felt heavy with the weight of the red folder's contents. I spent the first 20 minutes just observing. This was my parents' natural habitat, the stage where they performed their roles as the successful, upper-middle-class pillars of the community. Richard was in his element, wearing a tuxedo that likely cost $4,000, laughing loudly with his business associates. Margaret was draped in silk and pearls, her smile perfectly practiced as she accepted compliments on the wonderful party. And then there was Vivian. She was the center of the universe tonight. She wore a shimmering silver gown that looked like it was made of liquid moonlight, her hair styled in soft, expensive waves. She was surrounded by a group of younger socialites, talking animatedly about her exclusive Buckhead boutique and the innovative marketing strategies she was employing. I knew the truth. I knew that the exclusive boutique was currently 3 months behind on its utility bills, and that the innovative strategies were just her spending my loan money on Instagram ads. Aunt Helen, the family's reigning queen of backhanded compliments, drifted over to me. She was wearing a hat that looked like a bird's nest and smelled of gin. "Oh, Hazel, dear," she said, her eyes scanning my simple dress with a look of pity. "You look so practical. It's a shame you didn't ask Vivian for some fashion advice before tonight. She looks like an absolute movie star, doesn't she? Your parents are just so proud of her entrepreneurial spirit." "Practicality has its advantages, Aunt Helen," I replied, my voice as cold as the ice swans. "It means I can actually afford my own clothes." Helen let out a sharp, brittle laugh, clearly thinking I was joking. "You always were the droll one. It's good that you have that steady little accounting job to keep you busy. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight, I suppose." She patted my arm and moved toward the buffet. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of detachment. For years, these comments had stung like salt in a wound. But tonight, they felt like nothing. I looked at the ice sculpture, watching the water drip slowly onto the roses. It was a perfect metaphor for my family, expensive, beautiful, and melting away under the slightest bit of heat. I was the only one who knew the temperature was about to rise. I reached into my bag and touched the corner of the first white envelope. The audit was ready. The stage was set. And the walking ATM was about to issue its final, devastating receipt. The string quartet finished a soft rendition of a classic love song, and the room grew quiet. Richard stepped onto the small raised platform at the front of the ballroom, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The sound was sharp and clear, demanding attention. Margaret joined him, her hand tucked under his arm, her face glowing with the artificial radiance of a woman who believes her own lies. "Friends, family, and honored guests," Richard began, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who has never had to pay his own bills. 35 years. They say the first 3 decades are the hardest, but with a woman like Margaret by my side, it has been a journey of pure joy. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. Richard smiled, leaning into the microphone. "We have been blessed in so many ways. We have this beautiful home, this wonderful community, and most importantly, we have our children. As many of you know, our eldest, Vivian, is on the verge of something truly spectacular. Her boutique is going to redefine the Atlanta fashion scene. She has the vision, the drive, and the grace to reach the very top. Vivian, sweetheart, stand up." Vivian stood, a vision in silver, blowing kisses to the crowd as they cheered. Richard's eyes were moist with a performance of paternal pride. "It takes courage to chase a dream," Richard continued, his tone shifting to something slightly more serious. "It takes a certain kind of person to shine in the spotlight. And then, of course, there are those who play the supporting roles." He turned his gaze toward me, standing in the back of the room. The smirk on his face was one I had seen 1,000 times, the look he gave when he was about to make me the punchline of a joke to make himself feel superior. "Our youngest, Hazel, is the rock of the family. She's our quiet little accountant. She likes to stay in the shadows, crunching her numbers and playing it safe. We often joke at home that while Vivian was born to be a star, Hazel was born to be the one who makes sure the star's bills are paid. A few people chuckled. Richard, encouraged by the reaction, decided to go for the kill. In fact, he laughed, raising his glass high. I told Margaret just the other day that every family needs a balance. You need one child to make you proud, and you need another to be the walking ATM that keeps the lights on. To 35 years of family balance. The room erupted in laughter. It was a loud, jovial sound, the sound of 300 wealthy people laughing at a girl they considered a servant to her own family. I saw Vivian laughing the hardest, her head thrown back, her silver dress shimmering as she enjoyed my public humiliation. Margaret was smiling, nodding along as if Richard had just said something incredibly profound. I stood there, the center of their mockery, and I felt something snap. It wasn't a loud break, it was the quiet, final click of a lock falling into place. The shame I had expected to feel never came. Instead, I felt a surge of absolute, icy power. I realized that Richard had just given me the perfect opening. He had handed me the microphone without even knowing it. I set my glass down on a nearby table, the sound lost in the roar of the crowd's amusement. I began to walk toward the front of the room. The laughter started to die down as people noticed my movement. My face was a mask of professional neutrality. I wasn't a daughter tonight. I wasn't a sister. I was a senior auditor, and the fiscal year was over. I stepped up onto the platform, and for the first time in 27 years, Richard looked at me with a flicker of genuine fear. I didn't wait for Richard to hand me the microphone. I simply took it from the stand. The feedback hummed for a second before the room fell into a silence, so thick you could hear the ice swans melting. 300 pairs of eyes were locked on me, the boring sister in the $40 dress. "Thank you, Dad, for that lovely tribute," I said, my voice echoing through the ballroom with a clarity that surprised even me. It's true, I've spent a lot of time in the shadows, making sure the bills were paid. I suppose that's the burden of being the walking ATM. I saw Richard's jaw tighten. Margaret's smile was gone, replaced by a look of warning. I ignored them both and turned to face the audience. "But every ATM has a limit," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "And as of 5 o'clock this evening, mine has been reached. In fact, the entire branch is closing. I've accepted a senior position in Seattle, Washington. I'm moving 3,000 miles away tomorrow morning." A collective gasp went through the room. I saw Vivian's face pale instantly. She knew what this meant. Without my $450 a month, her boutique was dead in the water. "But before I go," I said, reaching into my bag, "I thought I should leave behind a little anniversary gift. Since Dad mentioned how much he appreciates my accounting skills, I decided to perform a full forensic audit of the last 5 years of our family's finances." I pulled out the 3 white envelopes. I handed the first one to Richard. He took it with trembling hands, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I handed the second to Margaret, and the third I tossed onto the table in front of Vivian. "Inside those envelopes, you will find a detailed breakdown of every single cent I have paid to cover Vivian's defaulted student loans, her boutique's rent, her car repairs, and even your anniversary cruise 2 years ago, Mom. I've included the market interest rate of 7%, compounded annually. The grand total comes to $52,842. The whispers in the room were deafening now. People were leaning in, trying to see the papers. The perfect image of the Richard and Margaret was dissolving in real time. "Hazel, stop this at once," Richard hissed, his voice cracking. "You're making a scene. Think of the family." "I am thinking of the family, Dad," I said, looking him right in the eye. "Specifically, I'm thinking of the member of the family who has been eating ramen for 3 years so Vivian could buy $3,000 shoes. I'm done. The audit is complete. The account is closed." I set the microphone back on the stand. The sound of the metal hitting the plastic echoed like a gunshot. I turned and walked off the platform. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at Vivian, who was staring at the spreadsheet in horror. I walked straight through the center of the ballroom, my head held high. "Hazel, get back here." Richard's voice followed me, but it was weak, stripped of its authority. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The air felt sweet and clean. I walked to the valet stand, handed the confused young man my ticket, and waited for my old Honda. As I drove down the winding driveway, leaving the glowing lights of the country club behind me, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the silhouette of the building, a temple of lies that I had just burned to the ground. I wasn't a walking ATM anymore. I was a woman with 3,000 miles of road ahead of her and a future that belonged entirely to her. The flight to Seattle was the most peaceful 6 hours of my life. I watched the sunrise over the clouds, sipping a coffee that I had paid for with my own money, knowing that nobody was waiting at the other end to demand a piece of my paycheck. But the moment I landed and turned off airplane mode, my phone began to vibrate so violently it nearly jumped out of my hand. The digital fallout was even more vicious than I had anticipated. Vivian had spent the night weaving a narrative of betrayal. She had posted a photo on Instagram of our parents looking old and frail, sitting at their kitchen table with the red folder spreadsheets spread out in front of them. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. Last night, our family was shattered by a cruel and calculated attack from someone we loved, it began. My sister, Hazel, chose our parents' 35th anniversary to air her grievances and humiliate us in front of everyone. She has spent years harboring a secret resentment, and she chose the most painful way to hurt us. We are devastated. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. Please pray for our parents as they navigate this nightmare. The comments were a bloodbath. Friends of the family, people I had known since I was a child, were calling me heartless, ungrateful, and a monster. Beatrice had even chimed in, claiming she had suspected something was wrong when she saw my empty apartment. Then came the texts from Margaret. There were 24 of them. Hazel, how could you? Your father has a migraine so bad he can't see. The country club called this morning to say we are no longer welcome at the gala next month. You have ruined our reputation in this city. Do you have any idea what you've done to your sister's boutique? Her investors are pulling out because of your lies. Call me immediately and apologize. We can fix this if you come home. I sat in my new, empty studio apartment in Seattle, the gray rain tapping against the window, and I felt nothing. The guilt that used to swallow me whole was gone. I realized that Margaret wasn't mourning the loss of our relationship. She was mourning the loss of the reputation and the money. She wasn't worried about my well-being. She was worried about the boutique's investors. I thought about the gray rock method Nora had told me about. Narcissists and manipulators crave a reaction. They want you to scream, to defend yourself, to engage in the drama so they can use your words against you. If you become a gray rock, boring, unresponsive, and cold, they eventually lose interest and move on to a new target. I didn't type a single word in response. I didn't defend myself on social media. I didn't call Margaret back to explain my side. Instead, I took a deep breath and began the digital execution. I blocked Richard. I blocked Margaret. I blocked Vivian. I went through my contact list and blocked Beatrice, Aunt Helen, and every single person who had commented on Vivian's post. Then I deactivated my social media accounts entirely. I looked at the blank screen of my phone. The silence was deafening, but it was also beautiful. For 27 years, my mind had been a noisy, crowded place filled with their demands and their insults. In one afternoon, I had cleared the room. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The fog was rolling in over the water, soft and quiet. I was a ghost to them now, a ghost with a $98,000 salary and a fresh start. They could keep their blessings and their sanctuaries. I had something better. I had peace. 6 weeks in Seattle had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. The constant tension that used to live in my shoulders had vanished. I was sleeping through the night. At my new firm, I was a rising star. Without the emotional drain of my family, I was performing at a level I had never reached before. My manager, a sharp man named Marcus, had already hinted that I was on the fast track for a partner-level role. But while my life was ascending, the reports from Atlanta were grim. Nora, my only remaining link to my old life, called me one evening to give me the update. "It's a disaster, Hazel," she said, her voice filled with a mix of shock and a little bit of professional satisfaction. "Without your monthly payments, Vivian couldn't cover the rent on the boutique. She tried to take out a high-interest predatory loan to stay afloat, but she couldn't even make the first payment. The store is gone. The landlord changed the locks last Friday." "And my parents?" I asked, looking out at the Puget Sound. "They're drowning," Nora replied. "The red folder incident didn't stay at the country club. Word got out to Richard's business associates. They realized his personal finances were a mess and that he'd been using his youngest daughter as a credit line. Nobody wants to do business with a man who has no personal ethics. His firm is bleeding clients. They're talking about selling the house, Hazel. The big colonial house." I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was fleeting. They had built that life on a foundation of sand and my labor. It was only a matter of time before the tide came in. The real shock came 2 days later. I was finishing a late-night audit in my apartment, the only sound the scratching of my pen against paper, when my building's intercom buzzed. I checked the time. It was nearly 10 o'clock. I walked over to the wall-mounted screen and pressed the view button. The image that appeared was like a ghost from a nightmare. Standing in the lobby was Vivian. But it wasn't the Vivian I remembered. The liquid silver dress was gone, replaced by a cheap, wrinkled trench coat. Her hair was a matted mess from the rain, and her face was gaunt, her eyes red and puffy. She was holding a single, battered suitcase that looked like it had been through a war. "Hazel? Hazel, please, I know you're there," she sobbed into the intercom, her voice thin and desperate. "The lobby attendant won't let me up. Please, I have nowhere else to go. Everything is gone. They took the store, Hazel. They took the car. Mom and Dad they're so angry I can't stay there. Please, just let me in for one night." I stood there, staring at the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me, the old, conditioned part, wanted to press the unlock button. It wanted to bring her up, give her a warm towel, and fix her mess like I had 100 times before. But then I looked at the suitcase. It was the same one she had used when she went to that expensive university, the one I had paid for. I realized that if I opened that door, the walking ATM would be back in business. The piece I had worked so hard for would be gone. I didn't press the button. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed down to the lobby. If I was going to end this, it had to happen on neutral ground. I wouldn't let her scent into my sanctuary. The lobby of my building was modern and cold, all glass, steel, and silent security. When the elevator doors opened, Vivian rushed toward me like a drowning person reaching for a piece of driftwood. She tried to throw her arms around me, but I stepped back, my movements deliberate and sharp. "Hazel, thank God," she cried, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I've been so scared. I spent the last of my cash on a one-way ticket here. I thought I could find you at the firm, but they wouldn't give me your address. I had to bribe a girl named Beatrice to get it. Please, tell me I can stay here." "How much did you pay Beatrice, Vivian?" I asked, my voice flat and unimpressed. "What?" "I don't know, $100? "It doesn't matter," she shouted, her theatrical tears starting to flow. "Hazel, I'm bankrupt. I have $20,000 in credit card debt and no way to pay it. The boutique is a shell. I have nothing. You're a senior auditor now, you have this beautiful apartment, you have so much money. Just help me get back on my feet. I'm your sister." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperation, but I also saw the calculation. Even now, in the middle of her emergency, she was looking at my expensive lobby and my designer cardigan and tallying up how much she could get out of me. "You didn't come here because you missed me, Vivian," I said quietly. "You came here because the other wells ran dry. You came here because Richard and Margaret don't have any more money to give you, and I was the only one left." "That's not true," she shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of rage. "I'm family. You're supposed to help me. You humiliated us in front of everyone. You owe me this." "I owe you nothing," I replied, my voice gaining a weight that made her flinch. "I paid $52,000 for the privilege of never having to deal with your drama again. That was the final settlement. If you spent that money on shoes and launch parties instead of your debt, that is a management failure on your part, not mine. Vivian stopped crying. Her eyes grew cold, and she let out a harsh, jagged laugh. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Sitting up there in your ivory tower, counting your little numbers. You were always the boring one, Hazel. The plain one. You think this fancy job makes you special? You're still just the girl who does the laundry while I shine. Maybe, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. But I'm the one who owns the laundry room now. And you're the one standing in the rain with a suitcase full of unsold inventory. I turned toward the elevator. Hazel, don't you dare walk away from me, she screamed, lunging toward me. The security guard, a large man who had been watching the exchange with professional detachment, stepped in between us with a firm hand on his belt. Ma'am, you need to leave, he said, his voice a low rumble. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor. As the doors began to slide shut, I saw Vivian standing in the center of the lobby, her face contorted in a mix of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked small. She looked unimportant. I'm choosing myself, Vivian, I said, the words a soft whisper as the metal doors finally met, clicking into place. The ride up was silent. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on my sofa and looked out at the city. I felt a strange sense of mourning, not for Vivian, but for the girl I used to be, the one who would have stayed in that lobby and apologized for being cold. That girl was gone. I was an auditor, and I had just written off a very large, very toxic debt. I picked up my pen and went back to work. The aftermath of Vivian's visit was like the clearing of a long, smoggy sky. I never heard from her again. Nora told me later that Vivian had eventually slunk back to Atlanta, where she was forced to move into the guest room of our parents' new home, a small, two-bedroom apartment in a part of town Richard used to mock. The colonial mansion was gone, sold at a loss to cover the debts they had accumulated trying to keep up with the Joneses. The irony was delicious, in a dark sort of way. Vivian, the golden child who couldn't stand to be out of the spotlight, was now trapped in a tiny apartment with two aging, bitter parents who had nothing left to give her but their own resentment. Richard's firm had finally collapsed, and he was working a low-level consulting job for a former rival. Margaret had lost her charity boards and her country club status. They were a family of ghosts, haunting each other in a cramped living room, surrounded by the few pieces of expensive furniture they had managed to keep. I, on the other hand, was building something real. My life in Seattle was filled with things that had nothing to do with my family. I joined a hiking club. I started taking pottery classes. I found a group of friends who liked me for my boring sense of humor and my loyalty, not for what I could do for their bank accounts. I realized that the walking ATM hadn't just been a nickname, it had been a prison. By defining me as a machine that produced money, my parents had stripped away my humanity. But by walking away, I had reclaimed it. I was no longer a resource to be mined. I was a person to be known. The final bit of closure came 6 months after I moved. I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small, framed photo of me when I was 5 years old, standing in the garden of our old house, holding a handful of weeds like they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. There was no note, no apology, no explanation. I looked at the photo for a long time. I remembered that day. I remembered how happy I had been just to exist. I took the photo out of the frame, walked to my balcony, and let the wind catch it. I watched as the image of the little girl I used to be tumbled through the air, disappearing into the Seattle fog. I didn't need the past anymore. I had the present. And for the first time in my life, the ledger was perfectly, beautifully balanced. Now, when I look out at the Seattle skyline, I don't see a city of strangers. I see a city of possibilities. I have a life that is entirely mine. My $98,000 salary has grown, my apartment is filled with things I actually love, and my phone only rings when someone I care about wants to talk. I've learned that the hardest part of leaving a toxic family isn't the distance, it's the silence. It's the moments when you want to share a victory or a struggle, and you realize the people who should care the most are the ones who will use it against you. But in that silence, I found my own voice. I found the strength to say no and the courage to say yes to myself. My parents and Vivian are still in Atlanta, living their lives of quiet desperation. Sometimes, I hear a rumor that they are still blaming me for their downfall, telling anyone who will listen that I am the selfish daughter who abandoned them. It doesn't bother me. Their narrative is their own prison. I am no longer a character in their play. I walked away without leaving them a single cent to survive the mess they created. I gave them exactly what they had given me for 27 years, nothing. I stood my ground, I checked the facts, and I closed the account. But late at night, as I look out over the Seattle skyline and see the lights reflecting off the water, I sometimes wonder, was I too ruthless? Did I cross a line by humiliating them in front of their friends? Am I the villain in their story, or am I finally the hero of my own? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Every single comment helps us bring more stories like this to life. See you in the next story.